Well, good afternoon, all. I wanted to share a story with you today, and my apologies to those who maybe showed up this last Saturday. It's something I shared at a larger group gathering this last Saturday, but most people weren't there to see it, and so I thought I'd share it again because it's a thought that's challenging to me. I've been thinking a lot lately about risk and taking risks, and trying to decide if I'm a risk taker or not. And the conclusion I came to is I'm a controlled risk taker. I will take risks, but only up to a certain point, in which case I'm out. And as I've thought about that in relation to living life, especially as a Jesus follower, I wonder sometimes our aversion to risk is damaging to us and to the people around me. And to illustrate it, I want to tell you a story about two ships. You may be familiar with them, you may not be, or you may be familiar with one of them. The first ship is called the USS Californian. It was built in 1901, and in April of 1912, it was 11 years old. It was a freight ship primarily. It made money for its owners that way. It was very modest, nothing extravagant. And on April the 14th, 1912, it was traveling across the Atlantic, uneventful trip. And one night, they kind of looked around. They said, hey, there's some sightings of ice in the water. Let's just cool it. We'll cut the engines, and we'll wait till morning when we can see a little bit better. And so they waited. At the very same time, there was another ship called the RMS Carpathia. Now, this ship was also built in 1901, so in April of 1912, again, 10, 11 years old. And it was more of a passenger ship, and it was 3 days into a journey in that same area on that day of April 14th, 1912. Now, if you're a student of history, you know what happened, because just before midnight on that day, the Titanic hit an iceberg and began to sink. And if you've known the story or seen the movie, it didn't take very long for them to know the Titanic was not going to stay afloat, despite its reputation. And so they began to send out distress calls by radio and fire off rockets and flares to try to attract the attention of any ship nearby. Well, the Carpathia was about 60 miles away, and they got the distress call from the Titanic. And the captain immediately set sail, but being 60 miles away, even at top speed, it was almost 4 hours to get to where the Titanic was. And so it was the middle of the night, but he said, we're going to go. He cut all extra power, anything that could get them more speed from their engines. And so they sailed on for 4 hours to get to where the Titanic was. This was the ship that picked up 700 survivors, while 1,200 other people perished. Now, what's interesting is the USS California was also in the area. But rather than being 60 miles away, they estimate she was between 5 and 15 miles away. That's it. But they had done two things that were a problem. One was the radio operator had turned off the radio and gone to sleep, and so they never got the distress call. The night watchman saw the rockets and the flares in the distance and reported to the captain that this was unusual, that maybe they should do something, and the captain's decision was that it wasn't significant enough to worry about it, and they did nothing. And when he woke up in the morning and turned the radio back on, they found out what had happened. They immediately steamed to where the Titanic was, but by then, it was just wreckage and dead bodies. There was an inquiry about the Californian, about what they had done, what they could have done, how many more people might have been saved if they had responded and actually taken the risk of running to the aid of the Titanic. The RMS Carpathia, on the other hand, the captain and their crew, they received commendations and medals because they had risked their lives to save other people. And I wonder, which of those ships are you more like in your life, particularly when it comes to the people around you? Because the people around us that don't know Jesus are dying. They have no hope. They don't live with the good news of the gospel, and in their relationships and in their lives and in all that, they live with this specter of nothing in the future. And yet we have hope. We have the gospel to bring. And I wonder if I have the sense of urgency of the Carpathia that says we will do whatever it takes, regardless of the risk, to help people whose lives, their very lives, are in danger, to introduce them to Jesus, the lifeboat, the Savior, the salvation that they need. Or do we way too often act like the Californian, knowing that there might be a problem out there, but seeing all the risks of the things that could go wrong if we did something, and so we wait until we have clearer directions? I trust that we will together become more like the Carpathia, willing to do whatever God leads us to do, to take the risks that are necessary to see people saved. Have a great week. Till next time.